Hey, Adventure Explorers. Welcome to this edition of Training Intensives, where we go through all things personal training. Now, we've gone over some mobility work last week with the Fab Four. We've also gone over the movement map. Now, as we start to bring these concepts together, this is the heart and soul of your personal training. And these are some of the mindsets and some of the tools to really utilize to help you stay consistent with your personal training. Also, remember why you're doing your personal training and exactly what to do next. So, today, what we're going to do is we're going to go over a little tool called the Learning Map. And this is one of the mindset tools. And the Learning Map really highlights how learning is a skill. And with learning being a skill, there is an optimal position and there's also an optimal way to learn. Success indeed is an action. Your brain is going to thank you for this. And oftentimes, what this lecture really is about is it's understanding the distinction of not what to learn necessarily, rather, how to learn. How to learn. And we like to look at learning as a skill. When we understand and actually do learning as a skill, and we know how to learn, what ends up happening is that you can take your skill set across different vocations, subjects, and different areas of your life. This skill transcends any type of box, whether it's whatever profession you're in, whatever your degree is in. This skill helps you go across these different vocations in your life. So, in order to become a learner, first and foremost, we have to identify two very important questions. These are more prerequisites. Now, these are the prerequisites because we have to get into an optimal position to actually receive information. So we have to identify if anything is in our way. And spoiler alert, it's usually ourselves in the way. Now, obviously, there's extraneous circumstances where other things are literally in our way, but we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is ourselves, and we want to be able to clear our own personal runway. And we do this by asking two questions. Am I willing to be wrong? And am I willing to change? You can also ask them as, am I able to be wrong? And am I able to change? You can use these interchangeably. And we want to have the willingness to be wrong and change because oftentimes we get stuck about what we think is right and what we think is correct. And it's important to address that mindset. There's an old saying that you can tell by someone's intelligence level if they're able to take an idea into their head and entertain it, but not necessarily take it on. And this distinction is important because this is a choice. It's voluntary. And it also takes a lot of practice to be able to take in ideas in our head, think about it, have a conversation about it in our head, and then whether agree with it or not. A lot of the times it's very this or that, but being able to take that thought into your head and think about it and be curious, this really helps us open the door for learning. Now, once we have those two questions established and we're a little bit more grounded, step two is to position yourself. There is an actual scientific position that is optimal for how much you can learn. As you look at the bell curve, notice where the optimal position is to learn. And that position is right between teacher and student. And this is often the dynamic that's played when you're learning. There are times in a situation, in a dynamic where you can learn, where you will often be the teacher. And then there's going to be times where you're often the student. And it's important that we take on this dynamic with learning because if we only take one side of that dynamic only, then we're not going to learn as much. And this, as we'll get later into this presentation, as you'll see, one of the actually best ways to retain information and learn is to actually teach others. It's actually the quickest and the most powerful way to learn effectively and quickly without being urgent or skipping anything. Now, as you notice too, like we talked about earlier, there has to be a certain level of curiosity because if we're not curious, then our mind can't be open. But if we're too curious, rather naive or gullible, notice how, as you're more closely fully open to new learning, the amount of information or the amount of things that we learn is actually far less. Now, the classic example, too, as we all know, is if someone knows everything, the know-it-alls. I know this, I don't need to understand anything else. I got this all figured out. And that's more in the position of arrogance. And you may very well know everything in a given topic. But in order to learn more and in order to teach, it's very, very important that we have to be a little bit open-minded and we can't pretend to be know-it-alls because that position, nothing happens. So for the people who are more naive and gullible and trusting, my best advice is to teach more, even if you're in the beginning phases. And that can look as simple as talking to somebody about what you're learning. It doesn't have to be anything too formal or structured, but saying it out loud and discussing it and teaching others what you are, that'll help you take on that teacher dynamic a little more. Now, if you're arrogant and you know everything, it's helpful to consider the student part of the dynamic. And in this part of the dynamic, what I've often noticed as a teacher myself, and also a self-proclaimed know-it-all sometimes, full disclosure, I notice that when I take on the student dynamic and learn from other people, not only do I learn more and I become a better learner and my skill develops, what I also notice too is I become a better teacher. As a teacher, I need to be a student and look at other people's as teachers. So important. Because when I do that, I can get data about what I'm learning about right now in real time and getting real data and not getting just the data in my head and being stuck in my head about it, but also getting the data and getting feedback immediately. So what I've noticed is that as I play that teacher-student dynamic, I learn so much from you all. So much from you all. And another side note, one of the reasons why we put this presentation together is because this is a skill that everyone in the community has been talking about. They've been talking about how to learn new things, how to develop their skills, and obviously we develop the skill of movement through our movements, but it's also important we train our brain so that we can remember those personal training dynamics. We can remember feel, we can remember force and implement those concepts with our training. And we also remember ultimately that training is preparation for life. Training is preparation for life. And as I alluded to, this whole process of learning as a skill, there's a third step to this. And the third step is application. And application being the third step after clearing the runway, identifying what's in the way. Am I willing to be wrong? Am I willing to change? Excuse me. Step two, which is positioning yourself. And as we understood, is playing that teacher-student dynamic is the best way to position yourself for optimal learning. It also helps position other people for learning and teaching as well. Such a solid positive to that. And this third part is how do we put this to use? What does it look like on the court of life? Application in real life, the three best ways to retain information and to develop your skill as a learner is to teach others, practice, and discuss. These three application tools are so powerful because they're so engaging. When you're teaching somebody something, you're putting it all out in the line. You're expressing it out loud. As you practice things, whether it's the repetitions, whether it's a certain subject, the homework, and then discussing, writing down your answers, sharing it with the teacher, having a live discussion during class, discussing with your friends what your personal training program is. These are going to be ways to retain information best. And I can't stress the fact how important it is that you get feedback in real time, immediately, for most of these different ways to retain information. Now, lecturing, reading, audiovisual demonstration, these are all great things. We're looking right now at a demonstration and we're discussing it. And you're also getting this audio visually. You can see the graph. You can also hear my voice. And you're also reading the words. This is somewhat of a lecture. So these are all important ways to learn. But the ones on the top four, it's very, very helpful and also critical for learning to close that loop and make it smaller, that learning feedback loop smaller by discussing, practicing, and teaching. Now, the classic example in a classroom is that there's always those one or two kids that raise their hand for everything and they discuss everything. And they also end up teaching all the other students who might not have done their homework. They're also teaching them about what they learned, which is another perspective in addition to the teacher. So we want to complement the top of the pyramid with the bottom part of the pyramid. And with this bottom part of the pyramid, this is where we want to also practice our application the most. We want to really practice these things. Here's another better picture of it, a little bit bigger for you all. So some of the keynotes as we talked about, your position absolutely determines how well you learn. And the optimal dynamic is between teacher and student, where we're not too open-minded and yet we're not too closed-minded. And the true mastery, the true competence of learning, one of the keynotes is, and one of the telltale signs is, someone who is able to look at things with new eyes while maintaining their own principles and values. That's one. Another one is being able to entertain different ideas and thoughts and considerations and not take them on necessarily. The third one, and this might be the most powerful of all three. I find we learn best whenever we're learning, whether it's in a class, personal training, or this webinar, the most important thing to remember is that you have your own unique perception of life. You have your own unique needs, demands, and wants. So it's important to utilize your own personal lens when you're learning from other people's perspectives. Now, there's some subjects where it's like you might not be the subject master, and it might not be that relatable to your life yet. And in that case, I understand taking those new ideas in and learning them, and because you're creating a new paradigm for yourself. But even then, it's important to bring them into your own paradigm and your perception in a way that works for you. So, looking at things, especially with topics like this, it's really important that you hear what I'm saying and you hear my examples and how it works for me, but not taking that at face value because it might not work for you. It's important that you look at things with your own lens as well, so you address you first. And as we address us first, we're then able to go and make an impact out in the world better because we're expressing more authentically, more aligned, we're in the spaces that we're supposed to be. So I wanted to remind us of all that, of how important that is to take things on from your own perspective and how it applies to you personally, not necessarily somebody else. That's usually a losing battle, normally. The most effective way to learn and retain information, as we discussed, is doing, discussing, and teaching. And what I was mentioning with number three, the keynotes, is knowing your lane. What is yours and what is not? Very important. And again, taking on that dynamic of teacher and student is going to be really, really helpful for that. And finally, action is required, movement. And I find that this is actually one of the biggest key marks and keystone land land decisions, if you will, of why I find so many of my students really winning because they're applying things in real time right now. It's easy to get lost in the mental space and the emotional space. And ultimately, it comes down to our actions, our actions. And so movement is required for learning, whether it's expressing vocally, whether it's physically moving, it's listening, observing, all these different things that are associated with learning. In this training intensive, I wanted to really dive into learning as a skill, especially in today's world where there's literally unlimited information and most of it's free. It's very important that we understand this dynamic between teacher and student so we understand what's ours. We understand truly how to integrate things into our personal training. And finally, also to know how to learn most effectively. The loop can get closed quicker and quicker without rushing. We can't rush that process of learning, but if we learn in the most effective ways that we can learn, we get quicker feedback, and therefore we learn quicker without rushing. Finally, to bring this all back together, there's one more concept I wanted to share with y'all today, and that is called the trivium. And the trivium is the three-step learning process. And in this three-step process, we first have knowledge. This is information. And with this knowledge, we take this information in, kind of like you're doing on this presentation. Second step is understanding. And in this understanding phase, this is where we start to apply our learning. We talk things out, we listen, because we're using this filter in our brain to understand what's important and what's not. That's the understanding process. We have to understand what is important and what is not. Because finally, the third step is wisdom. Now, wisdom is action. I see people getting this confused all the time, and I want to put this to rest finally, this word distinction. Knowledge is not wisdom. Knowledge is simply information. Wisdom is a demonstration of a deep understanding of knowledge, and we show that through our actions. Wisdom is action. That's why a lot of the time you're saying wisdom doesn't speak. It's true because it's just movement. And that's what we're trying to teach you all and teaching you guys with this course is we're teaching you those wise movements so that you understand how to move your body and you move your body in the way it's supposed to move. That's why we've refined it down to these body weight exercises to get started. So you can really tap into that wisdom and you can move with wisdom, not just knowing, because knowing is not enough. Knowing is one of the steps. It's very important for understanding. But without the action, it stays up here or it stays in here, and we don't sing that music. Knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. That is the trivium process. Consider this three-step process as you take on learning as a skill. These two things are very related. As you know how to learn, and you also understand the trivium process, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, this allows you to really develop your skills in your vocation, and this transcends into all areas of your life. Whether you're a mother, you're a father, you're an Olympic skier, you go do cold plunges, whatever it is, this transcends all areas, and you can become an expert and more of a master in those vocations. This is the learning map. We've gone over the movement map. And we got some fun stuff for you guys for the rest of this year. We've got two more maps to cover. We have the healing map, and we also have the lifestyle map. And we're going to keep diving into these so that you guys have the best structure possible for your personal training. Have a great rest of the day. See you guys next week. Make it the best day on purpose.